small group again, and we're going to be talking about discipleship in the church. So let me first just read this quote by C.S. Lewis. He's one of my favorite authors, and this quote actually, I think, to me, gets at the heart of discipleship. It says, "The next best thing to being wise is to live in a circle of those who are." And I think that's something that we should really take to heart. There are a lot of things in our lives that we don't necessarily know how to deal with from our own experience and our own knowledge. But discipleship really offers us the chance to use the experience and the wisdom of other people as we navigate through our own lives. But right now, I would say that the church is in a discipleship crisis. It's not something that we typically talk about. It's a word that we commonly throw around, but it's not something that we really see all that often. Michael Ramsden from the C.S. Lewis Institute says that the American church is dying, not from a lack of effective evangelism, nor from a lack of resources, but from a lack of effective discipleship. Just before we go on, how many of you would say that beyond congregational worship on a Sunday morning, that you are being directly discipled by your church? Okay, so that's a problem. I mean, we're called to go into the world and make disciples. It's part of the Great Commission, but it's not happening. The church hasn't taken a stand in that area, and as a result, we find ourselves floundering sometimes. Discipleship is incredibly important. Forgiveness and grace do not come without spiritual transformation, and that's an aspect that we are really missing. Forgiveness and grace might be free, but they don't come without responsibility on the behalf of the Christian, and certainly not on the behalf of the church. That transformation really entails spiritual formation. We really need those elements, those really strong elements of discipleship and mentorship in our lives in order to grow in those essential aspects of our faith. It's the process of being possessed and permeated by the character of Christ, and we do that in fellowship. It's very much entailed by fellowship that leads to discipleship. Without discipleship, our growth is stunted, and we really find ourselves struggling to move on in our walk, to pursue something that should be incredibly important to us as believers. Luther, a Christian theologian, points out that the word disciple comes from the Greek disciplos, meaning learner or pupil. And even just the definition of the word gives us a really good idea of what should be happening in our lives. We may learn on Sunday morning, but how much of that learning is really personal unless it's something that gets reinforced by discipleship, something that's reinforced by really strong, effective influences of other Christians in your lives. I know that typically what I am tempted to do is to be a church-going Christian, to love God and to pray, but not really to grow unless I'm faced with something that turns into a big trial in my life. And I don't think that's the way it should be. And the reason that our lives kind of follow that up and down cycle is because we don't have that consistent discipleship. Those people who are sharpening us, who are prompting us, who are really forcing us to grow in these three areas specifically. Lightweight publishers suggest that discipleship is growth in the knowledge of our faith. So really just that base understanding of who God is and who we are to him and what he's about in the world. Growth in our relationship with God, so that interaction between a holy, omniscient God and the people that he saved. So building that relationship, really solidifying it as far as our Christian walk goes. And then finally, growth in the expression of godly living. So those three elements are really the product of discipleship. If you're in that really strong fellowship, that discipleship element, you will be forced to grow in those areas by default. Yes, we should be pursuing them intentionally, but discipleship leads to those elements because, again, back to the C.S. Lewis quote, if we're not wise in those areas ourselves, then we need to benefit from the wisdom that those around us are actually creating in relationship with us. I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's a theologian from the early 1900s. It says, the Christian needs another Christian who speaks God's word to him. He needs him again and again when he becomes uncertain and discouraged, for by himself he cannot help himself without belaying the truth. He needs his brother man as a bearer and proclaimer of the divine word of salvation. He needs his brother solely because of Jesus Christ. The Christ in his own heart is weaker than Christ in the word of his brother. His own heart is uncertain, but his brother's is sure. And that really speaks to how God created community. We weren't created to function as Christians apart from the corporate body. We weren't created to function as a sole source of light in the world. We were created to shine together and to build off of those assurances in our own hearts. Where one person is unsure, the other Christian picks up the slack. Where that Christian is unsure, another one comes along to pick up the slack. And that really is the essence of discipleship, where we're benefiting from that collective wisdom that God has given specifically and individually to the people around us in our church, in our congregation of believers, whether it's based on a collection in a building or just those around us. So some points of action that come from this discussion. Greg Ogden, he wrote a book called Model of Discipleship. And these are some of the suggestions and practical steps that he gave in that book. And this is actually a really good resource if you're looking to create some points of action within your church. First, he suggests that we have focus groups consisting of no more than 3 people. Because scheduling is such an issue that we often get frustrated before we even get started, just trying to get everyone together. Or if you have a small group that's larger than that, he suggests that it's really hard to keep everyone on the same page because with a weekly meeting, maybe only 5 of the 10 people you have in your group will show up, and it just gives them an opportunity to fall behind in the growth, and it kind of unbalances the group. Next, he says that a practical step is multiplication. And multiplication is best served in a group that does not have a hierarchy. Because if you split off and start creating new groups and start multiplying yourself, the original group could feel lost without a leader. But if you go into it without that leadership solidified and you're really just leading yourselves as a group, multiplying becomes so much easier. Finally, he says, avoid program-driven emphasis, so don't center your discipleship around an event, because there's not always going to be an event. And stay away from 2-tier discipleship, which goes back to the wise and then the wiser. So don't look at it that way. Everybody has their own thing to contribute to discipleship. So even if there is a leader in your group, that leader will still learn from those under him, just as those under him will learn from the leader. Some personal elements of change that you can actually start implementing right away, even if your church doesn't start that emphasis, are just some suggestions here. First, for those of you who are parents or not, or thinking about being parents, parenting is the first step or zone or, I guess, battlefield. You will be discipling your children, and you will be discipling them for their primary years. The first glimpse they have into discipleship will be you. So that's something to keep in mind. Next, you can find a mentor, somebody who you do consider to be wiser than yourself, to be more formed in their faith, just to give you that support and give you strength where you find your own heart lacking. And then finally, even if you can't find a focus group, typically you can find a small group that you can engage in. And that will give you a formation or an initial way to break into that discipleship element and start enacting it in your life. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day.